Welcome back, everybody, to a fun tier list video. I love doing these as it doesn't allow you just to view me. You get some other amazing people on here, and we're so glad to have Maddie from Beaver Mosh on here. Hello, Maddie.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to do this.
Oh, very excited to have you on. I've been watching your videos for a couple months now. Love your deep dive into some of that really metally heavy stuff that I
Thank
love
you.
checking out. And you got me into a bunch of albums this year. So, I wanted to thank you for that, as well as just let people know that Maddie's out there. And Maddie, do you want to tell us about your channel and what people can expect if they want to follow you, which they should?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you checking it out. I'm glad I was able to turn you on to some records. Yeah, I my name is Maddie. I run a channel called Beaver Mosh. I don't know what the name means. Don't ask. It doesn't mean anything. I just picked two
Amazing.
words that sounded cute together.
Hmm.
Mosh is kind of a metal call, but the beaver I don't know.
Right.
Um and I talk about metal music. I interview bands, I review records pretty rapidly, and I try to stay focused on kind of the deeper dive, like really like
Mhm.
digging into Bandcamp and trying to give you stuff that like Loudwire or Metal Injection aren't
Mhm.
talking about. I
Yeah.
will mention some of the bigger names, and I'm glad I get to do this so I get to talk about a legendary band like Mastodon. But
Mhm.
my role, I feel, in my channel, at least right now, is to really be a source for what the other, bigger uh, publications aren't really pushing towards you. So,
Mhm. That's amazing because it's very similar to why I started my channel, which is talk about prog music that nobody was talking about. So,
mhm.
yeah, I love to hear that. And I think that's why a lot of people start their YouTube channels. So, you should go and check out Maddie. I've left her video or her channel down below
Thank
so
you.
that you can go and show her some love. But yeah, as alluded to, we are talking about Mastodon.
Hell
And
yeah.
I want to know, Maddie, how did you get into Mastodon? What was your Mastodon journey?
Yeah. So I would say I started in the Mastodon a little later, and I'm pretty sure the first Mastodon album I heard was Leviathan.
Hmm.
Um, I so I and I actually told the story on the last interview, but I grew up very evangelical, so there was no
Okay.
secular music in my house,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
But I did find Christian metal.
It's out
Um,
there. Yeah.
So I was very familiar with the concepts of death metal and doom metal and black metal, and I loved it. But I didn't listen to the real stuff. I listened to the unblack metal and
Right.
Christian mastodon bands.
Right. Right.
But as I got into college and made my own decision and started discovering music for myself, I branched out a little bit. I was like, okay, and then obviously I kind of lost the religion if that's not obvious to you. Um, but I just wanted to start uh venturing into metal, and that's just kind of Mastodon is a band that you don't have to dig very deep to get mentioned to you, but it's not like they're like a watered down version of metal. They're just by word of mouth that good and that um recommended. They
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
because they have such a consistent and such a iconic discography, like, in terms of like their brand of experimental sludge metal. They are at the top, and for good
Yeah.
reason. And so that's kind of how I got into it.
Amazing. Yeah, it's very similar. Well, I shouldn't say very similar because very different paths, but like I got into it around college and university myself, doing my
Mm,
master's degree. Um, I was really into like the progressive rock kind of stuff and starting to get a little bit more into the heavier side with, I had already consumed all of Dream Theater stuff, going into
yeah.
Opeth and Between the Buried and Me. And then one of my friends was like, oh, you got to check out Mastodon because, they're the next step. And at first I'm like, oh, they're a little too heavy, a little too sludgy. But
Mm.
it was when Crack the Sky came out that I'm like, oh, okay, I can get into this. And it's been like I've grown to love them and I've seen them countless times now live. So yeah.
Oh Lord, I love Crack the Skye.
Oh, it's just, yeah. I know we're going to talk about it once we get into the specifics. So
Yeah,
let's actually get into the specifics here. I'm gonna
yeah.
share the screen into the tier list that I've got here.
Oh, we're doing this version. Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna do this version. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, and before we get in, let me ask: Are we when we're grading them? Are we grading them against each other or as just the quality? So, like, are we saying this is a D album as compared to other Mastodon albums, or we're just saying it's a D album just in terms of its overall quality compared to
I
all metal?
see. Yes. That's always the internal struggle that I have with these because there are some bands, and Mastodon might be one of those that are included, that are like B and up and nothing's going to touch C or D.
Yeah,
So I think this will be like, we already know all these albums are great. Like, some are definitely better than others, but I think kind of compared to themselves, just so
yeah,
we have a little bit more of a uh like a clean spread rather than everything just being shoved up to the top.
yeah,
Yeah. I've also moved Call of the Mastodon and Cold Dark Place over to the far side because we're only going to be looking at the official studio releases rather than the
yeah.
EPs or things like that. So medium rarities and their live albums also won't be on here. So yeah, just looking at the studio records, and I think we can start with their first album of Remission,
Hmm.
very early 2000s, the one that kind of got them onto the scene. Where would you put Remission? And
Ye-
what's your thoughts about Remission?
Yeah, so Remission is towards the upper half for me. I really enjoy Remission. It's a bit more. You could tell that they hadn't really discover what Mastodon is, but there is still this just raw energy to it. It's kind of their most gritty record. But those progressive tendencies are still there. And I think just as an overall package, for people who want the dirtier side of Mastodon, this will do it for you. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it's as good as some of the ones they would come up with in the near future from this, but
Mm-hmm.
it's still a fantastic record. And so it's not an S tier for me, but it's definitely at least an A tier, in my opinion.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I would put this more in like a B tier for me, only because I enjoy more of their experimental, trippy, and proggy stuff. But
Yeah.
in terms of like their heavy stuff, this is their heaviest album um I think they've ever really released. Like, other albums have heavier moments on them, but like as a
Mhm.
whole from start to finish, this was them really starting to figure out what puts them above everybody else. This is them really coming into their own. So yeah, for me, this is a B tier. But I'm okay for now to put it into an H here,
Well,
and kind of
yeah.
see where things land.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Now we can go on to the album that I think most people would consider their big breakout album,
Yeah.
the follow-up album of Leviathan.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think we need to talk too much about this. I'm going to just slide that right up into the S
It's an S
tier.
tier. Uh I mean, just the first track, Blood and Thunder, is such a
Mhm.
classic. Just the gruffness in the vocals, those riffs, like it just like screamed its presence, and the rest of the record kind of follows suit. Like it's just
Yeah.
such a commanding opening track that is doesn't light up until the record is over. It's
Mhm.
fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it's that last track of Hearts Alive. This track alone was the one that made me fall in love with Mastodon. This was because, as I mentioned before, my first album of them was Crack the Skye, but
Mhm.
I figured, okay, maybe they're just like a one album kind of a group, but it was Hearts Alive that I was like, nope, these guys can carry through multiple albums. And yeah, I love the concept. I love how they're able to put this classic book that I think most people are very familiar with in a new
Yeah.
spin, and just that raw guttural power. So yeah,
And you can see
very.
that though. Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say
You can
very
see,
easy S tier. Go for it.
yeah. And it's like you could see the production improving here, but it's not quite as maybe polished down as maybe they'll get in later. There's still a roughness to it that I really enjoy.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, and that's one of the things I love about sludge metal is that like there's always this little bit of a grime on the mix just to like keep it a little bit rough, and it just makes those harder parts hit that much harder. Um, yeah, and I love it. We're going through these pretty quickly. But I mean, some of these are easier than others. I'm
Yeah.
really interested to hear what you think about Blood Mountain, because I know Blood Mountain's one that is a little bit more divisive, especially in their discography.
Yeah. I would put, so I think maybe what's going to happen here is maybe we're going to switch spaces and how we feel with Remission and Blood Mountain in terms of like the
Okay.
first four. Um, Blood Mountain is a B tier for me.
Hmm.
I mean, there are great moments for sure. Colony of Birchman. But I think I think this is kind of a bridge album between Leviathan and Crack the Skye into like the various kind of identities of Mastodon, where it doesn't quite have that guttural punch as Leviathan has, but it isn't as adventurous as they'll get with Crack the Skye. And so it kind of straddles that. And so where it's very enjoyable, but doesn't feel like a absolute classic.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I always call this as like a pivotal moment where they're in transition, but they haven't quite made the
Yeah.
transition yet. Um, I love how like the first four albums, like Remission, Leviathan, Blood Mountain, and Crack the Skye, are all like different elemental kind of albums, and like this one is very like, in my mind, it's very like earth, it's very like
Yeah.
stonework, right? Very unyieldy in that case, and it's hard to take it in sometimes. I don't return to this one as much as a lot of my friends do.
Yeah.
Now that being said, there's still a lot of really really good moments on this record, but I don't turn back to it as much, and I would agree it's a B tier for me. um and I maybe I need to give it more of a shake, but I mean, I've listened to this album for over a decade.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wish that it had a little bit more. It's not quite as trippy or experimental as some of the other albums in their discography that we'll be
Yeah.
talking about in a bit. So yeah, it's kind of B tier for me because there's still enough on there to return to. All right. Crack the Skye. Should we just do what we did with Leviathan and just put that right up into the S tier?
Yeah, and I don't know where it is on your absolute, but it is my favorite Mastodon
It is
record.
my favorite as well. Very
Um,
easily my favorite.
I mean, just it's bookended by two phenomenal tracks. I mean, just Oblivion is probably the best example of Mastodon's ability to write a very memorable hook, but
Hmm.
also be very spacey and heavy with that. It's not it's it's not corporate rock at all, but it has moments where you could see the crowd, singing along and getting excited over it. But it
Hmm.
still, the record is very, there's so many complex compositions and passages, and it feels like an odyssey. It feels like a journey, and I absolutely adore this record.
Yeah, 100% agree. I love how dense this record is. I love how like this is where they're really starting to play with their trippy side of things. And
Yeah.
they've flirted with the prog tendencies on Leviathan, but I feel like they were really, really stretching their legs just on the Tsar and the Last Baron, both
Yeah.
being well within 10 minutes. Um, yeah, this is the one that really like it was my introduction to them.
Hmm.
Outside of one of their albums that we'll be talking about in a little bit, this is the one that I just constantly come back to. I'm actually going to be covering it in my classics album month, because I feel like this album turned a lot of people from the prog side of things onto Mastodon.
Yeah.
And this is the album where if somebody's hesitant about the sludge metal or like the really aggressive metal, I'll say, well, give give Crack the Skye a chance, because it will reward you. So yeah, I mean, it got my dad
Yeah.
into Mastodon, and he will only listen to like Black Sabbath and whatnot. So yeah,
I'm interested in like where we're gonna like agree and disagree coming up, because
yeah.
I think we're coming from two different backgrounds here, right? Where I think it'll like
Hmm.
color our opinions. Where I'm coming from like someone who's like very much looking at this from like a metalhead, and you're looking for more of it as a prog side, as a band that
Hmm.
has two fan bases.
Yeah.
And but that could cause some, like, based on our foundations of where we're like typically looking for musical enjoyment, can cause some disagreements on these latter records for sure.
Yeah, and I kind of expected that. I figured for the
Yeah.
first four records, I figured we'd be on the same page. It's these last four records that I'm really excited to talk about. So at this point in my career, they had already released Crack the Skye, and I have fallen in love with the band, and I was very excited for The Hunter. And I remember The Hunter was the first record of theirs that I bought on the day of release, and I got the super ultra deluxe one, the 2 CDs plus a DVD, the whole big thing. This was one that it's taken me a while. It's taken me a while to warm up to The Hunter. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts on The Hunter are.
It hasn't warmed up for me at all.
Okay. Yeah, let's dig
um,
into it.
it's my least favorite by far. Um,
Okay.
do I think it's a bad album? Um, no. I think, and this is where I asked you this kind of the question, like, how are we ranking this in the beginning of the
Hmm.
video? I
Hmm.
think in terms of its overall quality as a metal album, it's Mastodon. It's a B tier. Like they don't put out bad music.
Yeah. Yeah.
But compared to what they have the potential to put out and what they have put out up to this point, it's the one I don't want to come back to. There's just better versions of everything they do on the Hunter on better records. So in that case, I mean, I feel like saying this is a D tier would be aggressive, but it's a C tier for me.
And even as somebody that has warm up to it, like I still come back to Tongue. I still enjoy Curl of the Burl.
Mm.
And honestly, it's the as interesting as it is, like the deluxe version, which has a couple of those bonus tracks. And the Octopus Has No Friends, and I believe it's Spectre Light, that is basically a Pink Floyd cover at that point. Like there is enough on here for me to be like, it's not an album that I would skip. Like I would put it on and I would still enjoy it. But I agree to your point in that they've done all of the things that I love about this album better on other albums. So I would be okay putting this in C.
Yeah.
I agree that
It
maybe D is a little bit aggressive, but
yeah.
C is okay.
This is the point in their career where they start to introduce really heavily some more accessible song structures.
Mhm.
And I don't begrudge them for, I don't think they sold out. I don't begrudge them for making more commercially appealing music. I don't know, begrudge them for like seeing that they had a fan base and wanting to make music for
Mhm.
a slightly different audience. But I think it came off kind of clumsy on this record, and they would find a way to do it more naturally on the next few releases.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. Even though I
Yeah.
feel like they're placating to the masses, I like to think, rather than trying to write accessible metal music.
Sure.
I'm still always like, oh guys, you don't have to do that. Like you're Mastodon, you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about those in specific, because I feel like the next two records, yeah, they're interesting. So let's move on to Once More Around the Sun, which is interesting because this is one that I play quite regularly, even though it's not my favorite of theirs. I know,
Yeah.
much like Blood Mountain, I know it has its fan base, but I don't return to it as much. Well, I don't enjoy it as much as the other ones, even though I listen to this one quite heavily.
Yeah. See, when I last listened to this not too long ago, my perception was it's definitely better than the Hunter.
Mhm.
I think they kind of get some of that grittiness back that I felt like kind of left off of the Hunter.
Mhm.
Um, and there are some great tunes on this, but I feel like it's not as consistent as some of their best work. Um, but the high moments are high.
Yes.
And and so in that case, like it's a record if you like I think you mentioned for one of the other Mastodon records, like if it's put on, it's definitely not skipping it. I'm going to enjoy it, and if
Mhm.
I see some of these tracks live, I'd love to see that. But it's because it's not like one of their essentials, in my opinion. I would say a B tier, but underneath uh, the other end.
Yeah, I'm a B tier for me sounds about right for this one.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
call an album like this a mixed grab bag, where
yeah.
like when it hits really really hard. And for me it's the 2 punch of Chimes at Midnight and Asleep in the Deep. Like those are two of my favorite Mastodon tracks. um
Yeah.
but there are other songs on here that I like, Halloween and the unfortunate closer of Diamond in the Witch House. I and Aunt Lisa. Aunt Lisa, I'm like, what are you doing, guys? I don't appreciate the call and response. You know, it's a choice. It's a choice.
Yeah.
So yeah, when it hits really hard, but there are some moments on here that I'm like, oofa doofa. But the one saving grace I will say is that the Motherlode has one of the best music videos I've ever seen. Um,
Mm.
it's the one where they hired a bunch of dancers to come on and just twerk throughout half of it. And I just think it's just hilarious and I love it. So, um, man, I expected this to take a little bit longer, but man, we are just rocketing through this. I need to have you on more often.
Yeah, we're agreeing more than we maybe expected. Like there's really no debate going on, but maybe with the
Yeah.
next couple we will.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's test the waters. How do we feel about Emperor of Sand?
I think Emperor of Sand is a so there are two peaks in kind of Mastodon's discography, in my opinion. There's Crack the Sky, and then they took a trip down and they're slowly working back to another peak. So maybe I gave away a little bit there. But
Okay.
Emperor of Sand is kind of an improvement over Once Around the Sun, but isn't quite the big opus yet. But there are improving, and it's becoming, you see those heavy tendencies coming back. It's progressive, and it doesn't like there are those hooks, but it doesn't feel as forced as it was on the Hunter. It just kind of evolves so organically. It just feels right, and I really enjoy it.
Hmm. Yeah. Sadly, I agree. Once again, I
Yeah,
obviously put this one much higher than Once More Around the Sun. Even though I will say, I don't feel as though this album reaches the same heights in individual songs.
sure.
Like I still love Chimes at Midnight and Asleep in the Deep more than I think any other song that's on Emperor of Sand. Um, but I will listen to Emperor of Sand because I think it's a much more consistent album. I think from start to finish, it is much more solid as an album. And I would much rather listen to this one than Once More Around the Sun. The only track on here that I begrudgingly kind of pass on is Show Yourself. I'm not as big of a fan of that one. I think that they could have left this one on the cutting floor, and it's a shame that this was the big single from the album.
It
Um,
was.
because I'm like, it's unfortunate that it's the weakest song off the album, and this was the one that they wanted to really showcase. My other minor gripe about this album is Jaguar God isn't longer. I feel like they kind of cut themselves off at the tendons there, from making a really really good 10-minute track by stopping just as it's starting to get really really good and really really interesting. um but other than that, we have again, kind of a return to form. It's much more sludgy. It's not as kind of trippy as the last two albums, because A Hunter and Once More Around the Sun, even with their flaws, are the two trippiest albums. I kind of consider them like the Revolver and the White Album from the Beatles. Like, it's very trippy, very experimental. They're really experimenting and trying new things. This is them being like, okay, so we experimented with all these things. Now let's try to hone our skills into what makes Mastodon Mastodon. So yeah, I'm wavering for this one because I know it's better than Blood Mountain and Once More Around the Sun. But do I feel like it deserves the A status that I'm eyeing there?
I think it's high B tier.
I agree that it's a high B. And again, we can, once we kind of place them in there, we can kind of do a little bit of
Yeah,
shuffling around.
we're not done after we talk
We're
about
not.
him in an
Oh
initial
no,
run.
no.
Yeah.
This is just throwing the spaghetti at the wall, watching what sticks and what falls.
Yeah.
So I know you've already shown your cards a little bit with the final one here, Hushed and Grim, their latest album, and their longest to date by quite a bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, why don't you dig a little deeper into that?
A tier. Easy A tier. This is the return to form for Mastodon. I know some people think it's maybe overstuffed, or too indulgent. It is like 80 minutes long, but it's just they're just hitting a creative peak here. Like, they're back. Like, it's just so explorative. There are some like softer moments, but then there are some really heavy moments. It's like well paced. It just feels like they're free, and they're not really writing this for any specific audience. They're just writing the music that they feel right at that moment. And I it's one of the records I could put on, and even though it's so long, I don't care. I just want to like soak it in. It's kind of like The Wall from Pink Floyd. It's long, but it earns being that long.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to show my cards as well, and I believe it's full A tier. This
Oh, wow.
is
Yeah.
I gave it the masterpiece rating, and it's one of the few records that I give a masterpiece to. This stands toe to toe with Crack the Skye and Leviathan. I didn't want to give too much away because Crack the Skye and Hushed and Grim go back and forth as to which is my favorite, and I only give it to Crack the Skye because I have more time with it. But no, there's something like the concept of this album, dealing with grief, dealing with the inevitability of death. It's very metal in that sense. For me, it was like this cathartic release. It was the expansion of Cold Dark Place, which was my favorite like Mastodon project up to that point. Because those 4 songs that are on that EP, I'm like, just put on maybe 2 more songs and you have essentially my favorite Mastodon project. They just took that and then expanded upon it even further. Yeah, and no matter how many times I listen to it, the final track of Gargantuum, it still makes me cry. Like, at the end, it always brings tears to my eyes, and I can't help but just weep at the end of it.
Pitchfork hated this album. I don't know why.
Really, I can't.
They gave it like a 5.7. I don't take their metal views seriously, but they did not like it.
Holy jeez. Like, I can understand, like, because I'm used to people not really connecting with the music that I love, right? Like, as a prog person, when somebody sees a song that's 20 minutes long, I'm used to people being like, oh, I'll never listen to that, right? Or like this massive concept album about grief and death and moving on and trying to live within the world of death. Like, it's like, yeah, I can understand people not liking it, but for me with this album, I struggle with people not at least understanding and appreciating it for what it is. That's the only gripe that I have, is like, well, I'm used to people not getting things, but like this one's, they're not hiding anything. There's not like a whole lot, like there's a lot of intricacies and there's a lot of really deep meanings on here, but it's not hidden. You don't have to dig for it. So yeah, I think that they are definitely back on track with this record, and this one was a massive return to form.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's the initial thoughts. How are we liking the placement? Do we want to move anything around?
Yeah, so I I would have personally Emperor of Sand above Once More Around the Sun. Um
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even above Blood Mountain. I don't know if that's how you're ordering it right there, but
So
yeah,
something like that.
yeah, I can
Because
agree with that.
I feel good about that. I would
Yeah,
agree to that. I mean, I don't know if you can see, but I have the picture disc right there
I saw
of
that. Yeah,
Emperor of Sand. And I actually bought it twice because as much as I love like I have their whole discography on vinyl. And I love when it's only one record. And the picture disc is only the one disc. It just the sound quality is kind of shit. Because it's picture disc. So I went out and I bought the
yeah,
record as the double record so that the sound quality is much better, even if I have to get up and because I'm lazy, right? I only want to move it twice. Um, but yeah, I feel much better. I like this. I like how this found itself.
yeah.
So yeah, not as much disagreeing as we thought, even though we're coming from two different angles at it. I mean, good music is good music, right?
Music is good music.
Yeah. Um, so great. Any last thoughts about Mastodon?
I'm very excited to see where they go next. I'm sure we're gonna get another Mastodon release. I mean,
Mhm.
Hush and Grim is now. I mean, that was 2021, so it's been only a couple years. So I know it was like. So I think they take about I don't know like a 4 year gap seems pretty average for Mastodon. So I
Yeah,
don't
three
know,
or
but like
four.
I just don't know. Yeah, I don't know how they're gonna follow up Hush and Grim. It's almost like they can simplify or they could try to be even more expansive. And
Mhm.
I think both carry risk, but I think Mastodon can figure out how to follow that up. And
Mhm.
I'm excited. I'm excited that like they are putting out this level of quality at this point in their career.
Yeah, because most bands, when they go through that experimental phase, I'm thinking of
Yeah.
like Rush and Dream Theater and all those bands, it's really hard for them to get past it. Like Rush, I think, did with their final three records, but Dream Theater really hasn't been able to do that. So I'm glad to see Mastodon with the same kind of legacy, being able to kind of get through that, find their roots again. And I'm really excited to see kind of where they're going to go from here. um
Mhm.
yeah, I'm super stoked for whatever they put out next, and as we can see, they can experiment and then eventually come back and put out an album that just blows us all away. um so yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Maddie, and sharing your thoughts about
Absolutely.
Mastodon. Yeah, we have a lot of very similar thoughts on these albums. I thought there was going to be a little bit more of a discussion, but as I mentioned before, like, good music is just good music. um so yeah, where can people find you?
Yeah. So I am on Twitter uh at Beaver Mosh. And then you can find me on YouTube where I talk about metal. I focus mainly on the newer stuff.
Mhm.
But Beaver Mosh on YouTube. I am uploading very regularly.
Mhm.
And hope you enjoy.
Amazing. And I've left all that down below in the description. So if you want to follow her, absolutely do so. I want to thank you once again for coming on, chatting about
Yeah,
Mastodon. Yeah, I should have you on more often because we just blow through these really quickly. So yeah, and
yeah,
thank you everybody for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Check out Maddie and check out myself. And yeah, I think that's going to be it for us. Yeah, thanks everybody so much for watching. And until
yeah.
next
Thank
time,
you.
Maddie and Notes, we are out.